So acetonitrile boils at about, I don't know, 70 degrees or thereabouts. Nitrobenzene getting on for 200 degrees. The acetonitrile is much more volatile. So you could take this copper solution and this nitrobenzene solution of the tetraphenylmethane, mix them together, get a homogeneous solution, allow it to evaporate, and the acetonitrile is preferentially lost, and the nitrile of the tetraphenylmethane can increasingly compete with acetonitrile for copper, and hopefully, if you're lucky, you get crystals, and it turned out in this case that I did. So this is a list of the simple potential targets we could go for. We've already seen we need tetrahedral building blocks to get a diamond structure. And some of the others I'll mention as we go along. So alpha polonium is just a convenient name for this way of connecting things together in 3 dimensions. It requires octahedral units. So this is a representation of the alpha polonium structure. Every node is connected to 6 others at the corners of an octahedron. 1 above, 1 below, 1 to the left, 1 to the right, 1 in front, 1 behind. And this dipyridine unit here was something, even in those days, you could buy. And that was, for me, always an advantage, not to have to make things. So we're interested to see if we could use this with various metal ions to generate an alpha polonium structure. I was able to get crystals suitable for crystallography very simply from aqueous solution with zinc and the 4,4-bipyridine. And the outcome was not a 3-dimensional structure, but a 2-dimensional sheet structure. It wasn't a surprise at all. Pyridine itself, in forming complexes, very rarely indeed takes on 6 pyridines per metal. This arrangement here with a water molecule above and a water below is much more common. So that it wasn't a big surprise. That report in 1990 was followed by a large number of other reports of polymers using 4,4-bipyridine, and one of them was this copper bipyridine coordination polymer, which I mentioned because it was the first coordination polymer to be referred to as a MOF. This combination of trigonal and octahedral components to give what we hope might be a rutile structure was of interest right from the early days. So here's a 50-year-old model of the rutile unit cell. The essence of the connectivity is centers attached to 3 other of the other type at the corners of a near equilateral triangle, and other centers that are attached to octahedrally to 6 of the first type of center. What we needed in those early days were building blocks that were simple, readily available, and stable. The simplest I could think of was this tricyanomethanide, intended to bind 3 metal ions at the corners of an equilateral triangle. Stuart Batten, who's present today, was the first student to work in this area. And Stuart was able to make a whole series of different metal derivatives of TCM, and they did have the rutile connectivity, which may not be so apparent in this representation here, but is more clearly obvious here, where we've got rutile itself, and this is the zinc coordination polymer. You can see identical connectivity. This ligand dicyanoamide also generated rutile structures where each of the 3 nitrogens could bind a metal ion, and it did form a rutile structure seen here to compare with the rutile itself above. And cobalt and nickel and copper derivatives of that ligand were obtained. The interesting thing about the cobalt-nickel compounds was that they behaved as ferromagnets at low enough temperatures. In other words, we were getting cooperative electronic interactions through the entire network. And this has always seemed to us to be an area of application that could well turn out to be more important than practically any other. This is a combination here, tetrahedral and square planar. So these are two nodes that are connecting, one going to the corners of a square, the other to the corners of a tetrahedron. The parent is platinum sulfide, which we see here. So the mauve platinum centers, all of them equivalent, are connected to 4 sulfurs at the corners of a square, and every sulfur is attached to 4 platinums at the corners of a tetrahedron. So initially we looked for the simplest components we could find, preferably nice and stable ones. And tetracyanoplatinate, an easily obtained, very stable entity, was an obvious choice. Under the simplest conditions, I was able to get crystals from a source of copper-1, the tetracyanoplatinate, and an appropriate countercation, which in this case was tetramethylammonium, and obtained crystals very simply indeed, and they did have the platinum sulfide connectivity. Right from the outset, using porphyrins as the square planar component was the exciting possibility for me. And so here we've got a tetrapyridine porphyrin. It has a metal which we don't want to be involved in the coordination chemistry making the polymer. So I chose to make the palladium derivative there, so that this center was essentially dead, and copper-1 as the tetrahedral component. And I was able to get very small crystals that Bernard was not able to do a single crystal structure on, but he did obtain a unit cell, and it was almost exactly what we calculated ought to be the case for a platinum sulfide arrangement. And then PhD student Diane McHale was able to use the copper tetrapyridyl porphyrin, much easier to make in larger quantities, and was able to make a number of platinum sulfide networks. And this is a representation of one of the compounds that Diane made. I don't think any chemist in 1994, when this was published, could see something like that without realizing the enormous potential that the approach had. Diane was able also to use a bigger square planar connecting unit with cyanophenyl units in place of the pyridyls, putting the coppers, getting on for 4 angstroms further apart. And she was able to grow crystals which turned out to have 2 platinum sulfide networks interpenetrating each other and stuck together very closely by attractive porphyrin to porphyrin interactions. And that doubled up framework occupied less than 30% of the volume of the crystal. So we have platinum sulfide itself here, the tetracyanoplatinate derivative, the tetrapyridyl porphyrin derivative, the tetracyanophenoyl porphyrin derivative, and that sort, and all of those are, have the same topology, exactly the same connectivity, And that sort of sequence or process, if you like, was given the name isoreticular expansion later on. And framework construction was referred to as reticular synthesis. So the simplest, most symmetrical 3D structure you can get with tetrahedral connecting units is diamond, as we've seen. The three-connected analog of that is really interesting. And the simplest way of doing that is in the so-called 10-3A network, which I'll explain shortly. And as a target for construction, it was very attractive to us. So here's 10-3A itself. The 10 means that the shortest circuits that you can find in the structure are 10-gons. And that's one of the characterizing features of a particular topology. The 3 means that the nodes are 3 connected, and the A means that it's the most symmetrical of a number of 10-3 networks that can be imagined. It's has cubic symmetry and is chiral. So here you can see, but chiral, I mean, it's not superimposable on its mirror image. And that leads to interesting consequences. But here you can see helices, in this case counterclockwise, running from front to back. All the helices are equivalent. If you looked from the side, you could trace here entirely equivalent helices, or if you look from top to bottom, likewise down here. So it has cubic symmetry, but is chiral. So this is the possible arrangement we're looking at in our general plan of doing things. This is an interesting ligand, hexaazatriphenylene, abbreviated HAT, which has the potential to bind 3 metal ions at the corners of an equilateral triangle. And we realized that if you have an octahedral metal ion and you attach 3 bidentate attachments, that the metal itself becomes a 3 connecting center. So these blocks of stuff here are heading out towards the corners of a equilateral triangle. So the metal itself becomes a 3 connecting node. Postdoc Patricia Jackson was able to make some HAT, which wasn't entirely straightforward in those days, spent a lot of time making this, and found that she could get crystalline silver derivatives that did have the 10-3A connectivity. So all the ligands were equivalent to each other, and the ligands and the metals are both 3 connecting centers. So here you can see a HAT ligand with 3 purple or mauve metal centers attached at the corners of an equilateral triangle, and all the metals are equivalent to each other. Each metal is chelated by 3 separate HAT ligands at the corners with their centers at the corners of an equilateral triangle. And so there's one of the 10-gons can be seen here, but you can find 10-gons all over the place in this structure. So about the late 90s, this pre-organized building block approach was pretty well founded. And I think what our work in the 90s showed that it would be possible to make an essentially unlimited number of coordination polymers with designed structures and topologies. Around the start of this century, enormous numbers of reports started to appear on coordination polymers. And that process seems to have continued. I retired, or retired in the sense the university stopped paying me in 2004. And I've been slowing down ever since. And I've just been completely unable to follow this outpouring of stuff. Finally, a few acknowledgements. My wife, my daughter, and my son for their love and support. And these two gentlemen, Bernard Hoskins and Brendan Abrahams, who did all the, well, together with the students they supervised, they did all the real science, came up with hard numerical facts. Any scientific respectability in the papers we put out is due entirely to these two gentlemen and the people they worked with. And the people on the right here are the ones who did all the work, and it's a great pleasure for me to see most of them here in Stockholm at the moment. So once again, I'd like to thank the Swedish Academy and the Nobel Foundation for this marvelous honour, and I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Professor Robson, for that very fascinating talk. So it's time for our second laureate, Professor Susumu Kitagawa. He was born in 1951 in Kyoto, beautiful Kyoto in Japan. And in 1979, he was awarded a PhD degree from Kyoto University. And then he went around a little bit in Japan, and after a while he returned to his hometown, where he's now professor at Kyoto University. By that, please join me in welcoming Dr. Kitagawa up on stage.
First of all, I'd like to express my gratitude to the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences and Nobel Committee for the honor of a lifetime. I'd like to thank everyone for being here. It's a great honor, and it's so wonderful to see my friends, colleagues, and my family here today. So let me start my talk.